Welcome to our radio and television in Pinduka. This is the English program desk. My name is Jean-Jacques Bosco. Tonight, we have invited for you a special guest, a guest of honor with an extensive background in numerous expertises. First of all, he's an author and an experienced writer, and his book is The African Great Lakes Region, Political Violence, and the Long Trail of Refugee to America. This is the book. Secondly, he's a former Rwandan radio journalist, you can tell. And thirdly, he was the late President Habyarimana's interpreter for 8 years. Finally, he was a Rwandan diplomat in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia prior to becoming first a refugee in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, of course, second in the USA, and finally, he's now the USA citizen. And his name is not hidden. You can see our guest. His name is Celestin Nsengiyumva. Mr. Celestin Nsengiyumva, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. I'm pleased to join you on your show, and I'm as agreed, I'm prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you, and congratulations on this new book. Again, it's the African Great Lakes Region, Political Violence, and the Long Trail of Refugees to America. And now, please, Mr. Nsengiyumva, please add something I may have forgotten on your resume. Or I may have omitted on your resume, please. And because this book you just put out, the African Great Lakes Region, Political Violence and Long Trail of the Refugee to America, is a special book and a fascinating, i.e., if looking at the hot topic we are talking about now, about the violence in the African Great Lake regions, and this is gonna be our today's discussion. Please go ahead and add something I may have forgotten on your resume, sir.
I think you did not mention that when I came to America, I could no longer be a conference interpreter. That is what I was doing when I was a refugee in Ethiopia. So here I became a community interpreter. That is an interpreter serving people who are illiterate or semi-illiterate. And I wrote this book out of my experience of working with refugees from all over Africa for about 15 years. And this is a book dealing with the plight of African refugees, dealing with the root causes of uprooting African populations. And this book also deals with the absence yes, it deals with the absence of maturity of some African leaders, not all of them, some, especially those in the African Great Lakes region, who have miserably failed their populations. Not only the refugees, but also the people who were left behind by refugees. The families were separated by political violence, and political violence does not allow our countries to move forward in development.
So thank you. Yeah, thank you for that addition, Mr. Nsengiyumva. And again, I'm pleased to have you on our show. As people can hear and can see, even your biography is also another book. And I cannot omit to mention that not only this is your first book, but is your third book. Besides this book, the African Great Lakes region, political violence and the long trail of refugees to America, you have also written another one. It's called Rwanda, Invasion, Libération, and Occupation, which is easy to translate into English. Read as Invasion, Liberation, and Occupation. Besides that, I do have another one. It's also written in English. It's called African Great Lakes Countries from Independence to Deception. I repeat again, to deception and instability. So you can see actually both books are hand to hand, which means you are really the expert we do need on this topic. And dear our listeners and followers, when we talk about African Great Lakes regions for young people, it means those countries, namely Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, DRC, and Uganda, just to name a few. And with our topic, we are discussing about the rampant violence in that region. And of course, today we will talk about the genesis of the violence there, the escalation of the violence, and the consequences, because we cannot exhaust the whole book, but at least the people will have a good takeaway. So before we go, let's go to the core of our subject. Please, I read your book, and I also read all the other two books. So I have the knowledge. I have been enjoying your books, and thank you very much for making this book available. So let's ask you one question that will help the listeners to go through what is the genesis of this violence in the African Great Lakes. Please take us from maybe the 1960s independence era all the way through today. Thank you.
Jean-Jacques, the root causes of political violence in the African Great Lakes region, the root causes have their roots, deep roots in colonial alienation of borders of what was then called colonial territories. Some territories were left as non-surviving territories which had no economic prospects ahead. The territories of Rwanda and Burundi were before appended to what was then Deutsch East Africa, but after World War II, after World War I, Germany lost its colonial possessions, and Rwanda and Burundi came to be known as Rwanda-Urundi, and that territory was now appended further to the west, to Belgian Congo, but they remained non-viable economic entities. And that is the main root cause of political violence, the fact that they are not viable economic entities. They need to be appended whether to the east or to the west, to Tanganyika or how do you call it, German East Africa, or then to the west to Belgian Congo. That is the root number one of the political violence in these two small countries. The other root cause of political violence is the immaturity of leaders. We have had immature leaders. Uganda had one Idi Amin who was a school dropout. I understand he dropped out of school in grade 2 elementary school. Today's president of Rwanda, who is known to be a very crafty man, is also said to be a high school dropout. And then the president we have now in Congo, Mr. Tshisekedi, himself went to school in Brussels. I understand he had registered into the a commercial school, a business school in Brussels, but did not attend the classes. And he did not work for his for the position he's holding now, and that does not give him enough legitimacy. His power does not enjoy a popular legitimacy, and that is also the case for the leader of Rwanda. And as you know, the leader we have in Uganda today has been in power for over 30 years. This is not a democratic governance. 30 years of power looks like a dynastic regime. So the other aspect of the other root cause of political violence in our region lies in the immaturity of our leaders, or in their egoistic, selfish.
Self-centrism, yes.
Yes. So the other point number 3 of political violence is the irregularity of political processes. That is the rigging of elections. Elections in our countries are rigged. Election rigging in Rwanda, in Uganda, and in Congo is now a machine which is not beginning now. It is a fully operating machine. We know that whatever the funding, whoever are the observers of our elections end up being rigged by the incumbents, who, in the case of Rwanda, do not tolerate rival.
The opposition, you mean? Eh?
The opposition, yes. Those who tried to run for public office opposing the president of Rwanda, many of them were jailed, others were exiled, and this is not a conducive atmosphere in which political processes can run smoothly to produce leadership enjoying popular support. So these are some of the root causes of political violence, but the end result is that population end up getting uprooted from their livelihoods, and they go in refugee camps. As you know, refugee camps are supposed to be temporary arrangements, but they end up lasting.
So thank you, Mr. Nsengiyumva. I'm not cutting you off. I just want to recap what you just said. According to your analysis, you are telling us that the root, the origin of this violence in the African Great Lakes lies under the fact that those countries were dismantled in a small countries, and then because of their poverty, that led to the violence. Number 2, the leaders who happened to lead those countries after the independence era, means the 1960s, they happened to be lack of knowledge, which means they were immature enough, especially because they didn't have enough knowledge to lead the country. Probably you forget in your examples, illustration, to mention maybe President Mobutu also didn't go far. So that's why you see Congo has been always in that kind of chaos. And then, of course, you finally said the selfishness of these leaders who are mainly plunder the countries without helping their populations. Is that a good summary?
Yes, it is a good summary.
Perfect. Now,
perhaps we should add that many of our leaders in the African Great Lakes region seem to be in the employ of foreign interests.
Okay. So understand. You are trying to say that they are just used as a puppet to serve the foreign interest in detriment of either their populations or their neighboring countries. Is that a good assessment?
Yes, I think so.
Wonderful. I think I agree with you. And I read also in your book. That's why I was excited to make sure you confirm that with us and our listeners. Now, when I read your book, you just said there was also another, I could say maybe an ignition. It means something started this. That was the genocide of Hutu in Burundi in 1972. How did you come to that conclusion, Mr. Nsengiyumva?
In fact, the thing which triggered political violence in our region was the dismantling of the Kingdom of Rwanda, which sent waves of Tutsi refugees into Burundi. And these Tutsi refugees prevailed over their colleagues in Burundi that they are a risk of Burundi's kingdom to be overthrown by Hutu population as in Rwanda. And that is what triggered Captain Michel Michombero to perform a preemptive strike against ethnic Hutu in Burundi. And that was the Burundi genocide of 1972.
Yeah.
1972.
Yeah.
That genocide also triggered the coup d'etat in Rwanda in 1973, because the waves of Hutu refugees who flocked into Rwanda created a kind of animosity against ethnic Tutsi. And this forced President Habyarimana to move in and overthrow the government of President Kayibanda on account of not having been able to quell the civil strife which was brewing in Rwanda against ethnic Tutsi. So in 1973, President Habyarimana staged his coup d'etat, and it was actually triggered by the genocide in Burundi. Now, with that, the country of Rwanda had about 20 years of relative peace. There was no recorded ethnic incident. There was no ethnic violence in Rwanda for about 20 years until the time when Rwanda was invaded by ethnic Tutsi who had been refugees in Uganda and who had become Ugandan soldiers, Ugandan military.
So thank you. Now, let's maybe stop there and just go progressively. You just mentioned the 1972 Hutu Burundian genocide as a criminologist and a law student. I agree with you because I know the definition of genocide, which means wiping out a population or a portion or the entire people based on their ethnic groups or based on their religions. So that's one of the definitions, or depriving them from procreation, it's another one, or using other means to reduce them entirely or partially. So that I agree with you. Now, when you are, I mean, you are just senior, older than me. You were there. You were a grown-up man in Rwanda, and me, I think, in 1972, I was actually 6 years old, so I didn't know what was happening. But after reading what happened in 1972, the numbers shows that it was around almost 200,000 Hutu killed in Burundi. So that's according to the news. So now comparing today, it's what I can call a nightmare. We are now talking about the violence that has almost wiped out more than 10 millions in the African Great Lake region, and namely in Rwanda, it was estimated maybe around 1 million. Other would say less, but it's just horrendous. And today, if we compare from the 1972 to those 10 millions, and it's still ongoing, what do you think? I mean, you analyze it. What your research indicate would have been a trigger to that escalation, to that magnitude?
Georgia, what is behind the magnitude of the horrendous massacres I mean, massive massacres of population in the African Great Lake region is the first one would be the introduction of modern weaponry. As you know, in 1959, when the Kingdom of Rwanda was overthrown, the weapons involved were traditional weapons of spears, arrows, and machetes, and in some cases only boxes of matches. These were the arms which were used in 1959 to overthrow the Kingdom of Rwanda. In 1972, Burundian army used modern weaponry, including machine guns, automatic rifles, and I can tell you that even the president of Congo at that time, Mobutu, he sent in Bujumbura light aircraft called Sukisa. The Sukisa intervened in Bujumbura to help Michombero, because Michombero had deceived information which had reached Mobutu, was that there was an insurgency in Burundi, instead of being a preemptive strike by the Burundi army to move out ethnic Hutu who seemed to be learned. Those who had been schooled, most of them were killed, and just a few fled to Congo and Rwanda and also Tanzania. So one of the elements which make it possible to have mass massacres is the use of modern weaponry. You may wish to remember that in 1995, April 1995, in the refugee camp of Kibeho, that is in southern Rwanda, President Kagame ordered deliberate shooting on a camp of internally displaced persons, killing about 8,000 people in a day, 8,000 in a day. And there is talk of 8,000, but the Australian medical unit which were present and which actually counted, the casualties, human casualties, they were stopped to count when they had reached that number of 8,000. So machine guns, heavy heavy weaponry were used in this political violence, whether in Rwanda or in Congo. In Congo, it was used by the Rwandan troops. Rwandan troops invaded Congo and attacked refugee camps. And this is unheard of, a refugee camp being attacked by government troops. And it was just horrendous. And it is in the process of those attacks against refugees in Congo said was about 300,000 people. But the political violence which continued in Eastern Congo was also the root cause of the death of millions of people from direct combat exercise, but also from humanitarian crisis, lack of medicine, lack of food, the prevalence of disease without medical attention, and that political violence in Eastern Congo is still raging on now, especially in North and South Kivu provinces, and it involves the same actor, the same, I would call the same troublemaker, and that is actually Rwanda Defense Forces. That's what I can say for now.
Yeah, thank you for that light. You just shed a light on this issue of the escalation or the exacerbation of this violence in the African Great Lakes region. However, I have a question. Now, you just mentioned the introduction of weaponry in that region could be the cause of the that rampant violence. Now, we do have countries like Tanzania. We do have countries like Ghana. We do have countries, huge country like Nigeria. Since maybe 1970s, we have not heard about any violence in their countries. Let's maybe talk also about South Africa, which is the what we can call maybe the superpower in the weaponry in the almost in the whole entire Africa, but there is no such violence there. How can you explain the introductory or the supply and of the weaponry being the cause? I mean, well, you mentioned the actor troublemakers. Maybe don't you think the issue lies on the troublemakers?
Yes, of course, the issue lies in the hands of troublemakers. But also, I wish to remind you that Nigeria, Tanzania, or Ghana are viable economic entities. And these countries have had enlightened leaders. Nigeria had its fair share of military coup d'etat, but all the military government in Nigeria ended up handing power back to civilian authorities and recognizing the result of elections, of free and fair elections. It is we could say the same about Ghana. Ghana has spearheaded peacekeeping operations all over the world because Ghana has had learned leaders. You may wish to remember that the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, was the first Pan-Africanist leader, and he was brought down for that. He was, because he was seen as
yeah, you mean Pan-Africanist, someone who wanted Africa to be united, like we have the United States of America, the European Union, or maybe let's say yeah, that's right. Yes, that's what you mean.
Yes, that is what I mean. And this Pan-Africanism was meant to make Africa to deal with other major political and economic entities as one. as one, which would mean that Africa was to be dealing with European Union as one, or with America as one. But these major world powers would not want that. They want to fragment us into smaller entities.
Smaller entities.
Yes, which can be dominated.
So easy.
Which can be easy to
lead,
follow.
Easy to rule, easy to plunder, easy to convince, easy to subjugate. I understand. Now,
so that when you consider countries like Rwanda or Burundi, they are going always to need a foreign sponsor. Their predicament, economic and political predicament, is that they are going always to need a foreign sponsor to be able to face larger neighbors like Congo or Tanzania or Uganda. As you know, if we talk about Burundi, Burundian government, which is there now, has the support of Tanzania. Do you understand?
Or in order to sustain its political stability.
Political stability and to sustain pressure for other powerful neighbors. You know that
against other neighbors.
Yes, other neighbors. You know that Rwanda had in 2015, the government of President Kagame tried to overthrow the government of Burundi.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yes. Now, I think you just convinced me on that, because when I thought about weaponry, I wasn't convinced, but by adding the ingredient of leaders' selfishness, I'm now convinced. And you also said we are led by leaders who, of course, don't have the knowledge of the well-being of the people, simply because for whatever reasons, they are not well enough educated to understand what myself I call the basic human rights, and how a country, a region can prosper. A country, I believe, and a nation cannot prosper under warfare. That's not, it's impossible. So now, thank you very much. And again, I have to remind our audience, our listeners, and other interested parties about this book. Now, before we go to the next question, where are this book available? Let's start by the African Great Lakes region, political violence and the long trade of refugees to America. Except I see, where can we find it? For instance,
Jean-Jacques, I have here in my apartment, I have about 200 copies.
Okay, so you carry 200 copies, which means via your email, via your telephone number, they can ask from me or somewhere else, or if they Google, they can see maybe any indication?
Yes, and whoever would want me to mail the book to him, I would. Right. As I said, I have about 200 copies here.
Yeah.
That's this one. Or the other ones are also on Amazon. They can be found.
Okay, so there is this one. It's called Rwanda, Invasion, Libération et Occupation, which means invasion, liberation, and occupation. So from the publishing company La Pagaie, this is available on Amazon, correct?
This one is available on Amazon.
On Amazon. And here we have the African Great Lakes countries, from independence to deception and instability, from the same publishing company, Edition La Pagaie. It's also on Amazon?
This one is also on Amazon, yes.
Okay, so now, ladies and gentlemen, listeners and our audience and friends of RTVI Impinduka, you can just now order this book by even by Googling Celestin Nsengiyumva on Google, because once you are a publisher, especially on this magnitude, so you can be found everywhere.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
At the same time, they can contact myself or anyone on our RTV in Pinduka, because this is the books I highly recommend, especially during this time where we are talking about this rampant violence and conflict in the African great regions, mainly between Rwanda, between Congo and Rwanda, or on the border of Rwanda and Congo, and everyone knows about this topic. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. And you are a great man. We need you. Thanks to your parents. That's why we have you for this knowledge. Now, let's maybe, it looks like our show is leading to its end. However, we have another occasions to go through some of this book, and I mean very in the upcoming days. But my last question now is, we have seen the beginning. At least you shed the light on the beginning of this violence. You also explained the escalation, why this has been ongoing, and now what have you found? What are your findings on the consequences? There are many. There are refugees, of course. There are death. We just talk about it. There are human traffickings. There are poverty, especially those countries are not moving ahead. How can you just explain those consequences to us, because you have done numerous research? At least those irresponsible leaders can maybe put their brain, what we call their brain, on time. They can think, they can reconsider their bad decisions. That is sad, and I mean, it's just incredibly sad.
Jean-Jacques, my advice to our leaders is that they should allow free democratic processes. This is the only thing which would enable them to go peacefully in retirement. In this book, I give an example of the president of Tanzania, Nyerere.
Right.
Nyerere retired peacefully in his village, and he died a respected statesman at the age of 77 years. There was also another one in Zambia, Kaunda. Kaunda died recently as a respected statesman, a professor, and a grandfather. He died peacefully in his village among his people. Now, our leaders, one of the things which forced them into nepotism and embezzlement and flawed democratic processes is that they are afraid of what will become of them when they leave power.
You mean judicial prosecution?
Judicial processes, or even the ability to go home and be free, move freely among their countrymen without fearing people accusing them for cold blood murders, for embezzlement, for nepotism. So the only way out for them, and it is in their interest also, the interest of our populations and our leaders, is that they should allow free democratic processes and allow other people to run for their office and accept to hand over power peacefully if elections show that they did not win elections. That would help Rwanda very much out of political violence. That would help Burundi. That would also help Congo, which is, as you know, Congo is the most important post-colonial factor. When we rig elections in Rwanda, most of the time, it is in order to be able to steal from Congo, and to steal from Congo on behalf of foreign interests. So only free political processes can free our leaders from this kind of trap. They are entrapped into corrupt processes just for the sake of staying in power and serving foreign interests. Now we need our leader to be the servant of our populations. That would help us out of, I think, it would help us out of political violence, and it would even enable refugees to go back home peacefully, not as captured enemy. Some refugees are now called the enemies of the state. It is really unfair, and our government wants to come back home and be a free, full participant in the political process. So free political process is the remedy which is going to free our region from political violence. That's my assessment.
So, Mr. Celestin Nsengiyumva, despite this topic, this hot topic, it brings sadness, but it's always enjoyable to listen to your research, your comments, your input, your opinion, and your objectivity on what's going on in the African Great Lakes. I mean, the violence. I really thank you very much, and I'm sure our audience, either who are just watching us tonight or in these subsequent days, will enjoy this show. And I promise them we're gonna have another show, another discussion on this topic, because after writing 3 books, you have many things to teach us. Maybe in one sentence, you have my older big brother, you have children grown up. I believe I have grown up children. And this is what we wish our new generation to do, means to read and write. What can you give to them as a message? What has inspired you to have the guts to go to school, study, be perseverance, tenacious, and now you have produced all these tools? Do you mind to give them really an advice, and a word of empowerment, maybe in a few sentences? Thank you.
Jean-Jacques, I would recommend, I would ask our youth to be steadfast, to read a lot, and try to know where they come from so that they can better craft the way forward. This is the only thing I can tell them, because they won't be able to craft a good way forward if they don't know where they come from. And the only way to know it is to read these books. I'm not the only one who wrote, but to read many people who have taken time to put in writing what they have seen, the experience they have had. I can tell you that writing about the African Great Lakes region, I traveled this region extensively when I was a journalist, and also when I was one of the directors in the office of President Habyarimana. So I followed him everywhere, in Zambia, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Congo, in Uganda, everywhere, in Ethiopia. And what I have put in writing is just a result of my experience, and I wanted to share this experience with them so that they can know, at least partly, where they come from, what makes them to be what they are today, either refugees or in their countries, but muzzled. They have they need must live
taped to their mouth.
Tight-lipped. So I would strongly recommend that they follow their studies, they be steadfast in their studies, but also I would recommend that they read in order to know where they come from, to know their background, political background, economic background, ethnic background. Some people are now trying to deny that there are ethnic groups. There are ethnic groups. To know all those things so that they can live in harmony with their time. Their time is ahead. We will have lived our time, but their time is ahead, and they need to live in harmony with each other in peace so that they can envisage development like other peoples of different regions of Africa and the world. That is what I can put forward as an advice to our youth. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Celestin Nsengiyumva, for that final words of wisdom, word from a wise man. You are telling that young generations, along others, including myself, we needed to read, we have to know our roots, and you have to be straightforward, ambitious. So once again, thank you. And I could remind our readers to go and check the African Great Lakes region, political violence and the long trail of refugee to America, written by Celestin Nsengiyumva. And I wish our audience and yourself, again, we are still in January, a happy 2023 year, prosperous, and all the best to you and to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques.